She arrived at Ashford Manor under a shadow of disgrace, accused of a crime she did not commit. Miss Eleanor Hartley had once been London's most sought-after governess, trusted by the finest families. Now, stripped of her reputation and desperate for refuge, she stood before the Duke of Ashford, a man whose cold grey eyes seemed to pierce through her very soul. He hired her with barely concealed contempt, his words sharp as winter frost. But what Eleanor could not know was that the Duke's disdain was a carefully constructed facade, for beneath his icy exterior he harbored a dangerous secret. He knew she was innocent, and he would stop at nothing to find the one who framed her. If you are listening to this story, do not forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you are listening to this story. I want to know how far it has travelled. The autumn rain fell in relentless sheets across London, turning the cobblestones into mirrors that reflected the gaslights in wavering pools of gold. Eleanor Hartley stood at the window of her modest lodgings in Bloomsbury, watching the city she had once loved blur into grey obscurity. Her reflection in the glass showed a young woman of 23, with dark chestnut hair pinned neatly beneath a plain bonnet and intelligent hazel eyes that held the weight of recent sorrow. She possessed the kind of beauty that came from character rather than mere symmetry. High cheekbones, a determined chin, and lips that once smiled easily, but now pressed into a thin line of resignation. 3 months had passed since the accusation that shattered her world. 3 months since Lady Pemberton's emerald necklace had been discovered in Eleanor's belongings at the Pemberton townhouse in Mayfair. The memory still burned with the fierce heat of injustice. She could recall every detail. The look of triumph on Miss Charlotte Pemberton's face, Lady Pemberton's shocked gasp, and the cold, implacable judgment in Lord Pemberton's eyes as he ordered her from his home without a character reference. "You were like family to us, Miss Hartley," Lady Pemberton had whispered, genuine pain in her voice. "How could you betray our trust?" Eleanor had protested her innocence, pleaded for a chance to explain, but the evidence was damning. The necklace, worth several £1,000s, had been wrapped in her own handkerchief and tucked beneath her mattress. No amount of denial could overcome such tangible proof. The constable had been summoned, though Lord Pemberton ultimately decided against prosecution, a mercy that felt more like prolonged torture, for it left Eleanor in a liminal space between criminal and free citizen. Now, survival demanded she find employment. Any employment. Her savings had dwindled to almost nothing. The few families who might have overlooked the scandal had been swiftly convinced of her guilt by whispered gossip at tea parties and pointed remarks at the opera. Charlotte Pemberton, it seemed, had made it her personal mission to ensure Eleanor's ruin was absolute. The knock on her door startled her from her reverie. Her landlady, Mrs. Crosby, entered with unusual energy, her plump face flushed with excitement. "A letter for you, miss. Came by special messenger, it did. Look at the seal. That's quality, that is." Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the heavy cream envelope. The wax seal bore an unfamiliar crest, a griffin rampant above a shield quartered with oak leaves and crossed swords. She broke it carefully and withdrew a single sheet of fine paper, the handwriting angular and decisive. "Miss Hartley," it read, "I am in need of a governess for my ward, Miss Juliet Thorne, aged 9. The position is at Ashford Manor in Derbyshire. You will instruct her in literature, French, music, and deportment. The salary is £30 per annum, with room and board provided. If you accept, present yourself at Ashford House in Berkeley Square tomorrow at 2 o'clock. I am aware of the circumstances surrounding your departure from the Pemberton household. That will be discussed at our interview. Ashford." Eleanor read the letter 3 times, searching for mockery or trap. £30 was a generous salary, far more than she could expect given her situation. And Ashford, she knew that name. The Duke of Ashford was one of England's most powerful peers, a man of immense wealth and influence who rarely appeared in society. Rumour painted him as cold, arrogant, and utterly indifferent to public opinion. Why would such a man employ a governess with a scandal attached to her name? The following afternoon, Eleanor found herself standing before the imposing facade of Ashford House, a magnificent Georgian edifice of pale stone that dominated its corner of Berkeley Square. Her serviceable grey wool dress and worn cloak seemed pitifully inadequate against such grandeur. The butler who admitted her was a tall, austere man whose expression betrayed nothing as he led her through marble halls adorned with priceless paintings and ancient suits of armour. She was shown into a library that took her breath away. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, their leather spines creating a tapestry of knowledge that spoke of generations of scholarship. A fire crackled in the massive hearth, casting dancing shadows across the Persian carpets, and there, standing before the fireplace with one hand resting on the mantelpiece, was the Duke of Ashford. He was perhaps 30 years of age, tall and powerfully built, with the bearing of a man accustomed to absolute authority. His hair was dark as midnight, swept back from a broad forehead, and his features were carved with aristocratic precision, a strong nose, sharp cheekbones, and a mouth that seemed designed for commands rather than smiles. But it was his eyes that arrested her. Pale grey, like winter clouds, they fixed upon her with an intensity that made her feel exposed, as though he could read every secret written upon her soul. Miss Hartley. His voice was deep, cultured, and edged with frost. You are punctual. Sit. It was not an invitation, but an order. Eleanor sat in the chair he indicated, keeping her back straight and her hands folded in her lap. She had learned long ago that maintaining dignity in the face of disdain was its own form of power. The Duke did not sit. He remained standing, using his height to dominate the space between them. I will be direct, Miss Hartley. I know of the accusation made against you by the Pemberton family. Theft is a serious matter. I did not steal that necklace, Your Grace. Eleanor's voice was steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. I was framed. One dark eyebrow rose in skeptical inquiry. An interesting claim. Have you evidence to support it? No, Your Grace. Only my word, which I realize holds little value in present circumstances. Indeed. He turned away from her, gazing into the fire. Tell me about Miss Charlotte Pemberton. The question caught Eleanor off guard. Miss Charlotte? She is Lord Pemberton's younger daughter, recently returned from finishing school in Switzerland. She is accomplished, beautiful, and... Eleanor hesitated. And? The Duke's tone was sharp. And she despised me, Your Grace, though I never understood why. From the moment she returned home, she undermined my authority with her younger sister, my pupil. She made pointed remarks about my origins, my lack of family connections. When the necklace was discovered, she was the first to condemn me. I see. The Duke was silent for a long moment, his broad shoulders rigid beneath his perfectly tailored coat. When he turned back to face her, his expression was one of barely concealed contempt. You will have heard, no doubt, that I care little for society's opinion. This is true. What society thinks of my household is of no consequence to me. However, I will not tolerate dishonesty or moral weakness under my roof. My ward, Juliet, has suffered enough upheaval in her young life. She requires stability and proper instruction. I can provide both, Your Grace. His lip curled slightly, as though her assurance amused him. Can you? A woman accused of theft, cast out without references, desperate enough to accept employment from a stranger. What guarantee have I of your character? The words stung precisely because they were true. Eleanor lifted her chin, meeting his cold gaze directly. You have my word, Your Grace, and you have the fact that I am here, willing to work honestly for my living, rather than resort to the very crime of which I was falsely accused. If my word is insufficient, then I must accept that this position is not meant for me. She began to rise, pride overcoming desperation, but his voice stopped her. Sit down, Miss Hartley. She sat, confusion warring with indignation in her breast. The Duke moved to his desk, extracting a document from a drawer. These are the terms of your employment. You will reside at Ashford Manor year-round. You will have one afternoon free each week and may attend Sunday services in the village church. You will take all meals with Juliet unless I specifically request your presence at dinner. You will not discuss your previous situation with anyone, staff, villagers, or Juliet herself. You will begin immediately. We depart for Derbyshire tomorrow morning at dawn. Do you accept? Eleanor's mind reeled. Your Grace, you speak as though you intend to employ me, yet you have made it abundantly clear that you find me contemptible. For the first time, something flickered in those grey eyes. Was it amusement? Calculation? It vanished too quickly to name. I did not say I found you contemptible, Miss Hartley. I said I would not tolerate dishonesty. There is a difference. My ward needs a governess with both education and resilience. Your references from previous families before the Pembertons were exemplary. Your pupils thrived under your instruction. That is what I require. Your current disgrace is frankly advantageous. You will be grateful for the position and unlikely to seek other opportunities. You will be tractable. The word stung like a slap. Eleanor understood then what he thought of her. A fallen woman, desperate and malleable, who would accept any terms rather than face the workhouse. He was not offering her salvation, but purchasing her compliance. Yet what choice did she have? I accept, Your Grace. He nodded curtly, as though her acceptance had never been in doubt, and handed her the document. Sign here. My housekeeper, Mrs. Blackwood, will see to your arrangements. Present yourself at the servants' entrance at 5:30 tomorrow morning. Do not be late. With that dismissal, Eleanor found herself back on the street, the signed contract clutched in her gloved hand, her emotions a tempest of relief, humiliation, and a strange, unsettling feeling that she had just become a piece in a game whose rules she did not understand. The journey to Derbyshire took 2 full days, and Eleanor spent most of it in silence, seated in the Duke's travelling coach alongside Mrs. Blackwood, a stern woman of middle years, whose grey hair was pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her skin. The housekeeper made no attempt at conversation, occupying herself with needlework while the countryside rolled past the windows. The Duke himself rode ahead on a magnificent black stallion, his figure visible occasionally through the coach window, always solitary, always remote. Eleanor wondered what manner of man chose such lonely transit when comfort was readily available. Everything about him spoke of contradiction, wealth beyond measure, yet Spartan simplicity in his habits, absolute authority, yet evident isolation. They arrived at Ashford Manor as twilight painted the Derbyshire hills in shades of purple and gold. The manor itself was a masterpiece of Palladian architecture, its honey-coloured stone glowing warmly in the fading light. It sat amid rolling parkland dotted with ancient oaks, with gardens that even in autumn's grip showed evidence of meticulous care. A river meandered through the grounds, crossed by an elegant stone bridge. Eleanor's quarters were located in the east wing, connected to Juliet's chambers by a shared sitting room. The rooms were comfortable, if not luxurious. A narrow bed with clean linens, a writing desk positioned near the window, a wardrobe for her meagre belongings, and a fireplace that someone had already kindled against the evening chill. It was more than she had dared hope for, and she found herself unpacking her few possessions with something approaching gratitude. She met Juliet that evening at supper in the schoolroom. The child who entered was a delicate creature with pale blonde hair and enormous blue eyes that held a wariness far beyond her 9 years. She was small for her age, with the fragile beauty of a porcelain doll, dressed in a simple dark blue frock that seemed deliberately sombre. "Miss Hartley," Juliet said quietly, executing a perfect curtsy, "I am pleased to make your acquaintance." The formality of it broke Eleanor's heart a little. "And I yours, Miss Juliet. But I think, when we are alone together, you might simply call me Miss Eleanor. Would that suit you?" Juliet's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment Eleanor glimpsed the child beneath the rigid propriety. "I would like that very much." Over the simple meal of roasted chicken and vegetables, Eleanor learned the outline of Juliet's story. She was the Duke's ward, the daughter of his deceased cousin, Major Thomas Thorn, who had died in a riding accident 2 years prior. Juliet's mother had passed in childbirth, leaving the child effectively orphaned. The Duke had taken responsibility for her upbringing with characteristic decisiveness, removing her from distant relatives who had shown more interest in her modest inheritance than her welfare. "He is very kind," Juliet said softly, her small hands folding her napkin with mechanical precision. "Though he frightens most people. But he reads to me sometimes in the evenings, when he's not too busy with estate matters. And he lets me ride his horse, Tempest, when he leads us about the park." Eleanor heard genuine affection in the child's voice, which complicated her understanding of the Duke further. A man capable of earning such devotion from a child could not be entirely cold, could he? That night, Eleanor was summoned to the Duke's study, a masculine domain of dark wood paneling, leather-bound volumes, and the lingering scent of tobacco and old paper. He stood behind his desk, still in his riding clothes, his expression as forbidding as when they first met. "Miss Hartley, I trust your rooms are adequate." "Yes, Your Grace. Thank you. Tomorrow you will begin Juliet's instruction. Mrs. Blackwood has prepared the curriculum used by the previous governess. You will adhere to it strictly. Juliet is intelligent but has been troubled since her father's death. She requires patience and consistency. Can you provide that?" "Of course, Your Grace." His eyes narrowed, studying her with that unnerving intensity. "You will also observe who comes and goes from this house. The servants, visitors, anyone at all. You will report to me anything unusual, conversations, behavior, correspondences. Do you understand?" Eleanor felt a chill of unease. "Your Grace, I am employed as a governess, not a spy." "You are employed to do as I command, Miss Hartley." His voice dropped to a dangerous quiet. "Or have you forgotten your position? You are here because I allow it, because no one else would have you. Do not mistake my tolerance for weakness or my commands for suggestions." Heat flooded Eleanor's cheeks, whether from anger or humiliation she could not say. "I understand perfectly, Your Grace." "Good, you are dismissed." She left the study with her hands clenched into fists, her nails biting into her palms. The Duke's contempt was palpable, and yet his request was strange. Why would he need a governess to spy on his household? What did he suspect? And of whom? The days that followed established a routine. Eleanor rose at dawn, took breakfast in the schoolroom with Juliet, and spent the morning hours on lessons. The child proved to be bright and eager, her previous wariness gradually melting under Eleanor's patient encouragement. They studied English literature and composition, practiced French conversation, worked through mathematics problems, and spent afternoons on accomplishments, watercolors, piano, and needlework. Yet always, Eleanor was aware of the Duke's presence, even when he was not physically near. He appeared without warning to observe lessons, standing silently in the doorway with his arms crossed, his grey eyes missing nothing. He questioned Juliet about her progress in a tone that brooked no dissembling, and he watched Eleanor with an expression that seemed to contain both suspicion and something else, something she could not quite name. 3 weeks into her tenure, Eleanor encountered him in the Manor's extensive library, where she had gone to select reading material for Juliet. He was seated at a reading table, surrounded by ledgers and correspondence, a decanter of brandy at his elbow, though it was barely past luncheon. "Miss Hartley," he did not look up from his papers, "find what you need and leave. I do not care for interruptions." "Of course, Your Grace." She moved quickly to the shelves devoted to children's literature, selecting several volumes of poetry and a natural history text she thought Juliet would enjoy. She was nearly to the door when his voice stopped her. "Tell me, Miss Hartley, do you still maintain your innocence in the matter of the Pemberton necklace?" She turned slowly, finding him watching her now with laser focus. "I do, Your Grace. I always shall, for it is the truth. And if I told you I had evidence that might exonerate you, would you want to see it?" Eleanor's heart began to race. "Evidence, Your Grace. What manner of evidence?" but he simply returned his gaze to his papers, his expression closing like a door. A hypothetical question only. You may go. Eleanor returned to the schoolroom in turmoil. What game was the Duke playing? Did he truly possess information about who framed her, or was this simply another form of cruelty, dangling hope before snatching it away? That evening, she joined the servants for their meal in the vast kitchen, as was customary. The staff at Ashford Manor was surprisingly small for such a grand estate. Mrs. Blackwood, the butler Graves, a cook, 2 housemaids, a scullery maid, and several outdoor men who saw to the stables and grounds. They were a close-knit group, polite to Eleanor but not particularly welcoming. It was the younger housemaid, Sarah, who finally broke through the reserve. "Don't mind their stiffness, miss," she whispered, while clearing the dishes. "They're just cautious. We've had troubles here, you see. Things going missing, strange visitors in the night. His Grace has been like a bear with a thorn in its paw, begging your pardon for saying so." Things going missing? Eleanor's pulse quickened. Sarah glanced around to ensure they were not overheard. Small things mostly, a silver snuff box from His Grace's study, a miniature portrait from the gallery, a guest book from the drawing room. "Mrs. Blackwood thinks we have a thief among us, but His Grace won't hear of dismissing anyone without proof. He's been questioning us all, having us watched." She lowered her voice even further. "Some say he's looking for something specific, not just catching a thief, but no one knows what." Eleanor absorbed this information, her mind racing. Could this be connected to the Duke's strange request that she observe the household? Was he using her position as governess as cover for his own investigation? That night, unable to sleep, Eleanor stood at her window, gazing out over the moonlit grounds. A movement caught her eye, a figure crossing the lawn toward the river, cloaked and moving with purpose. She could not identify the person at such distance, but something about the furtive manner suggested wrongdoing. Should she investigate? Should she report this to the Duke? Before she could decide, she heard footsteps in the corridor outside her room. Her door was flung open without ceremony, and the Duke himself stood on the threshold, still fully dressed, his expression thunderous. "Come with me. Now." He did not wait for her response, simply turned and strode away, clearly expecting her to follow. Eleanor grabbed her shawl and hurried after him, her heart pounding. He led her not to his study, but to Juliet's room. The child sat up in bed, her face streaked with tears, clutching a stuffed rabbit to her chest. When she saw Eleanor, she launched herself from the bed and into Eleanor's arms. "Miss Eleanor, someone was in my room. I saw them by my wardrobe, searching through my things." Eleanor held the trembling child close, her eyes meeting the Duke's over Juliet's blonde head. His expression was savage, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Search her room," he commanded. "Check if anything is missing. I will rouse the household." As the manor erupted into chaos, servants summoned, rooms searched, the grounds patrolled, Eleanor stayed with Juliet, soothing the child until her trembling subsided. Together they examined Juliet's belongings. Nothing seemed to be taken, but Eleanor noticed that a small wooden box on the child's desk had been opened, its contents disturbed. "What was in here, Juliet?" "Just old letters," Juliet said, wiping her eyes. "Letters my father wrote to me before he died. And a locket that belonged to my mother. But they're still there, see? Why would someone look at those?" Eleanor examined the letters and locket, finding nothing remarkable about them. But clearly someone had thought them worth investigating. The question was why. The search of the manor and grounds yielded no intruder. Whoever had been in Juliet's room had vanished like smoke, leaving behind only fear and questions. The next morning the Duke summoned Eleanor to his study once more. He looked haggard, as though he had not slept, his usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. "Miss Hartley, I owe you an explanation." The words seemed dragged from him, each syllable an effort. "The situation here is more complex than you know. Someone is searching for something they believe is hidden in this house. I do not know what it is, but I know it relates to Juliet's father and his death, and I have reason to believe—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with himself. I have reason to believe that whoever targeted my ward may also be responsible for the crime attributed to you. Eleanor's breath caught. Your Grace, I do not understand. What possible connection could there be between a theft in London and an intrusion at Ashford Manor? His grey eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw something other than contempt in their depths. She saw determination, and beneath it, guilt. Because Miss Charlotte Pemberton, he said quietly, is the niece of the woman who was married to Juliet's father. Because she stands to inherit a considerable sum if certain documents relating to Juliet's legitimacy were to be compromised. And because I have been investigating your case since the moment I heard of it, Miss Hartley. You were not chosen as Juliet's governess by chance. You were brought here deliberately to be protected and to help me uncover the truth. The world seemed to tilt beneath Eleanor's feet. Everything she thought she knew rearranged itself into a new and dizzying pattern. You knew, she whispered. You knew I was innocent all along. Yes. He did not look away, though the admission clearly cost him. And I am sorry for the deception, sorry for the contempt I have shown you. It was necessary to maintain appearances, to convince whoever watches this house that you were merely a desperate woman I took pity upon. But the truth, Miss Hartley, is that you may be the key to exposing a conspiracy that has already claimed one life and threatens another. Will you help me? Eleanor stood in the morning light streaming through his study windows, her entire understanding of her situation transformed in an instant. The Duke of Ashford, who had seemed her reluctant savior and casual tormentor, had been her secret defender all along. And now he was asking her to become something she had never imagined, an ally in uncovering the truth. Yes, she heard herself say, yes, Your Grace, I will help you. And with those words, Eleanor Hartley stepped from the shadows of accusation into a dangerous light. The revelation transformed everything and nothing. The Duke, he insisted she call him Ashford in private, reserving Your Grace for public consumption, explained the intricate web he had been untangling for months. Major Thomas Thorne, his cousin, had died not in a simple riding accident but under suspicious circumstances. The horse had been found with a deep gash on its flank, consistent with being struck by something sharp, causing it to bolt and throw its rider. In the weeks before his death, Major Thorne had written to Ashford expressing concerns about his late wife's family, specifically her younger sister, Mrs. Helena Ravenscroft, Charlotte Pemberton's mother. The Major had discovered financial irregularities in the management of Juliet's maternal inheritance, a trust worth £20,000 that had been placed under Mrs. Ravenscroft's stewardship until Juliet reached majority. He threatened to pursue legal action and remove her as trustee. 2 days after sending that letter, he was dead. I had no proof, Ashford said, pacing his study as afternoon light slanted through the tall windows. Eleanor sat in a leather chair, still reeling from these revelations. Only suspicion and a cousin's conviction that Helena Ravenscroft was capable of great cruelty to protect her interests. I began investigating quietly, hiring men to look into her affairs and those of her family. That is when I learned of you. How did you connect me to this matter? Charlotte Pemberton is Mrs. Ravenscroft's daughter. When I heard that a governess in the Pemberton household had been accused of theft shortly after Charlotte's return from abroad, I found it interesting. I had my men investigate further. They discovered that Charlotte had accumulated significant gambling debts during her time in Switzerland. She needed money desperately, and her mother's purse strings were already stretched managing Helena's own expensive habits. Eleanor's mind raced, pieces falling into place. The emerald necklace. It belonged to Lady Pemberton, Charlotte's aunt by marriage. If Charlotte stole it and blamed me, she could sell it through discreet channels and pay her debts. Ashford finished. Exactly. My investigators found evidence that a necklace matching that description was sold in Paris 3 weeks after your dismissal. The seller was described as a young Englishwoman of quality. Charlotte had conveniently travelled to Paris to visit friends at precisely that time. But why frame me specifically? Because you were competent and trusted. If you were discredited, dismissed, perhaps even prosecuted, it would serve as a distraction. More importantly, Charlotte knew her mother intended to send her to Derbyshire to visit and to search this house for documents relating to Juliet's inheritance. Having recently ruined a governess through false accusation, Charlotte would be unlikely to face suspicion if anything unfortunate happened to Juliet's governess here. Eleanor felt cold, despite the fire crackling in the hearth. You mean to say that I was not just a convenient scapegoat, but potentially a trial run for a more serious crime? Precisely. Ashford stopped pacing, gripping the back of his desk chair with white-knuckled intensity. Mrs. Ravenscroft and her daughter are searching for proof that Juliet is illegitimate, that the Major's marriage to Catherine Thorne was invalid for some reason. If they could establish that, Juliet's inheritance would revert to Catherine's family, specifically to Helena as the elder sister. £20,000 is sufficient motive for theft, fraud, and worse. But surely the marriage was legitimate? I have every reason to believe so. Major Thorne was an honourable man, but the marriage took place in India during his posting there, and the documentation is incomplete. A parish church burned down, taking many records with it. If Mrs. Ravenscroft could cast doubt on the validity of the marriage, the courts might rule in her favour, particularly as she has connections among the judiciary. Eleanor absorbed all of this, her earlier anger at Ashford's deception fading in light of the genuine danger facing Juliet. "What is your plan, Your Grace?" Ashford. He met her eyes, and she saw something shift in his expression. A softening, perhaps, or an acknowledgement of partnership. "We must find the marriage documentation before they do. I've written to the regimental chaplain who performed the ceremony, but he's currently in Burma and communication is difficult. In the meantime, we must protect Juliet and catch whoever is searching this house. That is where you become essential, Miss Hartley." "Eleanor," she said quietly. "If we are to be allies, you should call me Eleanor." "Eleanor," he said her name carefully, as though testing its weight. "You have access to areas and conversations that I do not. The servants will speak more freely to you than to me. If Charlotte or another agent of Mrs. Ravenscroft comes to Ashford, you will be able to observe them without arousing suspicion. And if they make another attempt on Juliet or this house, you will be close by to protect her. You trust me with this? With your ward's safety? I have investigated you as thoroughly as I investigated the Ravenscrofts and Pembertons," he said bluntly. "I know that you grew up in a Hampshire vicarage, that your father was a scholar and your mother a gentleman's daughter who married beneath her station but never regretted it. I know you were educated at Miss Wendell's Academy in Bath, that you financed your own tuition by teaching the younger girls. I know that every family who employed you before the Pembertons wrote glowing references, and that 2 of them attempted to persuade you to stay when you received better offers. You are intelligent, principled, and resourceful. Yes, Eleanor, I trust you with what matters most to me." The sincerity in his voice surprised her. This was not the cold aristocrat who had hired her with barely concealed contempt. This was a man who cared deeply for his young ward and who had been fighting a lonely battle to protect her. "Then I will do everything in my power to help you," Eleanor said, "but I have one condition." His eyebrow rose. "You are in a position to make conditions? If we succeed in exposing Charlotte Pemberton and her mother, I want my name cleared publicly. I want the truth known. I want my reputation restored." For a long moment, Ashford studied her. Then he nodded. "You have my word. When this is over, the truth will be revealed, and you will have justice." They shook hands on it, and Eleanor felt the strength in his grip, the warmth of his palm against hers. It was the first time they had touched, and the contact sent an unexpected frisson through her. Over the following weeks, Eleanor became Ashford's secret partner in investigation. She observed the household carefully, noting patterns and peculiarities. She befriended Sarah, the young housemaid, who proved a valuable source of information about comings and goings. She spent her evenings in the library, ostensibly reading but actually present whenever Ashford worked late, available for consultation and planning. It was during one of these evenings that their relationship shifted imperceptibly from alliance to something more complex. Eleanor had been reading poetry while Ashford worked through correspondence, and she came across a passage that made her laugh, a rare sound in the quiet library. "What amuses you?" Ashford asked, looking up from his letters. "Lord Byron's description of society ladies. She walks in beauty, like the night of cloudless climes and starry skies. It's lovely, of course, but I prefer his less famous work, where he admits that most society ladies walk in beauty like the night, primarily because gaslight is more flattering than daylight." Ashford's mouth quirked. Not quite a smile, but close. "You have read extensively." "My father's library was small, but well chosen. He believed women should be as educated as men, a radical position that did not endear him to his bishop. I grew up reading philosophy, history, science, and literature. It has made me rather unmarriageable, I'm afraid. Men do not appreciate women who have opinions about Locke's theories of government, or who can debate the merits of Copernican versus Ptolemaic astronomy. Then men are fools." The statement was delivered flatly, as simple fact. Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You are kind to say so." "I am not kind. I am accurate. You have a mind that should be valued, not suppressed." He paused, then added more quietly, "I have been thinking about what you said, about wanting your name cleared. You deserve more than that, Eleanor. You deserve acknowledgement that you were grievously wronged. Justice would be sufficient." "No," he said with sudden intensity. "It would not. You lost your position, your reputation, your livelihood because of Charlotte Pemberton's greed and malice. That cannot be undone with a simple apology or correction. When this is over, I will ensure that you have not just exoneration, but opportunities. References that will open any door, compensation for your suffering. I do not want charity, Your Grace. It is not charity, it is justice, and it is what you are owed." He held her gaze, his grey eyes fierce. "You must learn to demand what you deserve, Eleanor, not merely accept what others deign to give you." The conversation stayed with Eleanor long after she retired to her room that night. Ashford's anger on her behalf, his determination to see her restored, spoke of a man very different from the cold aristocrat he presented to the world. She found herself thinking of him at odd moments, the way his hair fell across his forehead when he was deep in thought, the rare occasions when his stern mouth softened into something approaching a smile, the sound of his voice saying her name. It was dangerous, she knew, to develop feelings for a man so far above her station. Dukes did not marry disgraced governesses, no matter how wrongly disgraced. Yet she could not quite suppress the warmth that bloomed in her chest when he sought her opinion, or the way her pulse quickened when he entered a room. 10 days before Christmas, the anticipated blow fell. Mrs. Blackwood informed Eleanor at breakfast that guests would be arriving. Mrs. Helena Ravencroft and her daughter, Miss Charlotte Pemberton, invited by Ashford himself to spend the holiday season at Ashford Manor. Eleanor's hand trembled as she set down her teacup. Juliet, eating her porridge across the table, seemed unaware of the significance. "His Grace thought it important to maintain family connections," Mrs. Blackwood said, her tone suggesting she disagreed with this decision. "They will arrive tomorrow and stay through 12th night. You are to continue Miss Juliet's lessons as normal and take meals in the schoolroom unless specifically summoned." Eleanor nodded, her mind already racing. This was Ashford's move, she realized, bringing his enemies close where he could watch them, giving them opportunity to reveal themselves. But it was also deeply dangerous, particularly for Juliet. That evening, Ashford summoned her to his study and confirmed her suspicions. "They will come thinking themselves invited as family. They will search for the documents they need, and we will catch them in the act. You must be vigilant, Eleanor. Do not let Juliet out of your sight when they are near. Trust no one." Not even you? She asked, attempting levity to mask her fear. He stepped closer, near enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the shadow of stubble along his jaw. Always trust me, Eleanor. I swear to you on everything I hold sacred, I will not let harm come to you or Juliet. Do you believe me? She did. Despite every rational reason to doubt, despite her history of misplaced trust, she believed him. Yes. Good. He lifted his hand, hesitating a moment before gently tucking a stray curl behind her ear. The gesture was tender, almost intimate. You are braver than you know. Remember that, when they come. His touch lingered in her memory long after she left his study, a promise and a question both. Mrs. Helena Ravencroft arrived like a winter storm, all imperious presence and cold beauty. She was perhaps 45, impeccably dressed in the latest London fashion, a burgundy travelling costume trimmed with black fur, her dark hair swept up beneath a hat adorned with ostrich plumes. Her features were handsome but hard, her blue eyes calculating as they swept over Ashford Manor's entrance hall. Charlotte, stepping from the carriage behind her mother, had matured from the girl Eleanor remembered. She was perhaps 22 now, strikingly beautiful, with golden hair, porcelain skin, and a rosebud mouth that curved into a practiced smile. She wore a travelling dress of forest green that complemented her colouring perfectly, and she moved with the confident grace of a young woman who knew her power over men. Eleanor watched their arrival from an upper window, keeping Juliet safely occupied with a geography lesson. The child seemed anxious at the news of visitors, her small hands fidgeting with her pencil. "Must I see them, Miss Eleanor?" Juliet asked quietly. "Mrs. Ravencroft always looks at me strangely, as though she's counting something in her head. And Charlotte pinches when adults aren't watching." Eleanor's protective instincts flared. "You will see them at meals if His Grace requires it, but otherwise you stay with me. If either of them makes you uncomfortable, you tell me immediately. Do you understand?" Juliet nodded, relief evident in her expression. That evening, Eleanor was indeed summoned to dinner, a command that surprised her until she realized that Ashford wanted her present, as both witness and protection. She dressed in her best gown, a simple but well-cut affair of deep blue wool that at least did not shame her completely, and descended to the formal dining room with her heart hammering against her ribs. The dinner party was small. Ashford at the head of the table, Mrs. Ravencroft and Charlotte on one side, Eleanor and Juliet on the other. The room was magnificent, lit by a chandelier that cast prismatic light across the damask tablecloth and gleaming silver. A fire roared in the marble hearth, but Eleanor felt cold despite its heat. Charlotte's eyes widened in theatrical shock when she saw Eleanor. "Miss Hartley, good heavens, is that truly you? Mother, you remember Miss Hartley, the governess from Aunt Pemberton's household, the one who—" She stopped delicately, as though the memory were too distressing to voice. "Indeed." Mrs. Ravencroft's gaze was reptilian in its coldness. "How unexpected to find you here, Miss Hartley. One would think such a scandal would make employment difficult to secure." Eleanor kept her voice level. "The Duke was generous enough to look beyond gossip to my actual qualifications, Mrs. Ravencroft. How charitable of him." The older woman turned her attention to Ashford, her expression transforming into something approaching warmth. "Dear Ashford, I confess I was surprised to receive your invitation. We've been quite worried about dear little Juliet, haven't we, Charlotte? So tragic, losing her father. Family must look after family in such circumstances." "Indeed," Ashford said, his tone giving nothing away, "which is why I thought it important that Juliet know her mother's relatives. She has been too isolated here." Charlotte leaned forward, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. "And how are you, dear Juliet? You've grown since I last saw you. You look very like your mother. Aunt Catherine was always so pale and delicate. Some might say fragile." The implication was clear. Weakness, perhaps illegitimacy, ran in the bloodline. Eleanor felt fury rise in her chest, but Ashford spoke before she could. "Juliet is thriving," he said coldly, "strong, intelligent, and increasingly confident. Miss Hartley has proven an exceptional governess. Has she? Charlotte's blue eyes fixed on Eleanor with predatory interest. That is remarkable, given her history. Tell me, Miss Hartley, was the theft charge ever fully resolved, or do you remain under suspicion? I do worry about the example set for impressionable children. I worry more about the example set by those who bear false witness, Eleanor replied quietly, meeting Charlotte's gaze directly. For they teach children that cruelty and dishonesty can go unpunished. Charlotte's perfect complexion flushed. Are you suggesting— I am suggesting nothing, Miss Pemberton, merely observing that reputation is easily destroyed, but truth is more resilient. Enough. Ashford's voice cut through the rising tension like a blade. This is neither the time nor place for such discussion. Eleanor, perhaps you would take Juliet upstairs. She looks tired. Eleanor recognized the dismissal for what it was. Protection. She rose, offering her hand to Juliet. Of course, Your Grace. Come, Juliet. As they left the dining room, Charlotte's voice drifted after them. Such familiarity, addressing the governess by her Christian name. One must be careful not to give servants ideas above their station. Eleanor's hands clenched into fists, but she kept walking, keeping her composure for Juliet's sake. Only when they were safely back in the schoolroom did she allow herself to breathe. I don't like them, Juliet whispered. They're mean, and they make me feel like I've done something wrong even though I haven't. I know, darling. Eleanor pulled the child into an embrace. But we are safe. His Grace will not let them hurt you. Over the following days, the house became a battlefield of subtle warfare. Mrs. Ravenscroft and Charlotte explored the manor extensively, their interest in the late Major Thorne's belongings particularly keen. They asked pointed questions about where his papers were stored, whether any correspondence had survived, if there were family Bibles with recorded marriages and births. Ashford parried their inquiries with aristocratic indifference, revealing nothing. But Eleanor, moving through the house on her duties, witnessed their true nature. She saw Charlotte slip into the estate office when she thought no one was watching. She heard Mrs. Ravenscroft questioning servants about the Major's final days. And twice she encountered them near Juliet's room at odd hours, their explanations for being in that wing transparently false. Eleanor reported everything to Ashford during their evening meetings in the library, now coded as reviewing Juliet's curriculum. He listened intently, piecing together a pattern. They are looking for something specific, he said one evening, his voice low. Not just general proof of illegitimacy, but a particular document. I wonder— What? Major Thorne's last letter to me mentioned a sealed packet he was sending for safekeeping. He said it contained proof of Catherine's innocence and Juliet's legitimacy, but the packet never arrived. I assumed it was lost in transit or destroyed. But what if he hid it here, intending to retrieve it later, or send it by a different means? Where would he hide something in this house? That is the question Mrs. Ravenscroft clearly wants answered. Ashford's jaw tightened. We must find it before they do. Their search became a race against time. Eleanor and Ashford began systematically going through the Major's remaining belongings, his books, his correspondence, his personal effects. They searched his former bedroom, now a guest chamber, where Mrs. Ravenscroft was ironically staying during the hours when she was at luncheon. They examined the library, the study, even the stables where the Major had kept his riding tack. It was Juliet who provided the crucial clue, quite by accident. One afternoon, while practicing her drawing, she showed Eleanor a sketch she had made of her father. I copied it from a miniature I have, she explained, producing a small portrait in a leather case. Father gave it to me right before he died. He said to keep it always, that it would remind me he loved me. Eleanor examined the miniature, a fine piece of work, showing the Major in his uniform. The leather case was slightly bulky, though, thicker than necessary for the painting alone. Juliet, may I look at this more closely? The child nodded, watching as Eleanor carefully examined the case. There, hidden behind the miniature, revealed only when she pressed a small catch, was a folded packet of papers, sealed with wax. Eleanor's heart raced. Juliet, this is very important. Have you shown this miniature to anyone? Mrs. Ravenscroft or Miss Pemberton? No, Miss Eleanor. Charlotte tried to take it once, saying it was too morbid for a child, but I hid it from her. It's mine, and I won't give it up. Good girl. We must show this to His Grace immediately. They found Ashford in his study, reviewing estate accounts, while Mrs. Ravenscroft and Charlotte were out taking the air. His expression transformed when Eleanor handed him the packet. You found it. By God, Eleanor, you found it. He broke the seal carefully, unfolding documents that had clearly been hidden for years. There was a marriage certificate, properly recorded and witnessed, showing the union of Major Thomas Thorne and Miss Catherine Helena Baxter. Mrs. Ravenscroft's maiden name was Baxter, in Bombay, India. There were letters from the regimental chaplain attesting to the ceremony, and most damning of all, there was a letter from Catherine herself, written shortly before her death, explaining that her elder sister Helena had always been envious of her marriage and happiness, and had made veiled threats about challenging Juliet's inheritance. This is everything we need, Ashford said, his voice rough with emotion. This proves Juliet's legitimacy beyond question and establishes Mrs. Ravenscroft's motive for wanting the documentation destroyed. But it does not prove she or Charlotte stole the Pemberton necklace or framed me, Eleanor pointed out. Not directly, but it establishes pattern and motive, and I received a letter this morning. He pulled a document from his desk, from my investigator in Paris. He has found the jeweler who purchased the Pemberton emerald necklace and obtained a sworn statement describing the seller. The description matches Charlotte Pemberton exactly, down to a distinctive scar on her left wrist from a childhood accident. Eleanor felt vindication surge through her like strong wine. Then we have everything. Not quite. Ashford's expression was grim. We have proof, but we need confession or capture in the act. Mrs. Ravenscroft and Charlotte do not yet know that we have found the documents. Tonight, I will let slip that I have located the Major's papers and am reviewing them in my study. I believe they will make one final, desperate attempt to steal or destroy them, and when they do, we will have them. That is dangerous, Eleanor protested. If they are caught, if they feel cornered, I will have men hidden in the study and surrounding rooms. You will stay with Juliet, behind a locked door. I will not risk either of you. That evening, Eleanor stood at her window watching storm clouds gather over the Derbyshire hills, her stomach tight with anxiety. Somewhere below, Ashford was setting his trap, and she could only wait, helpless to do anything but pray. The clock struck midnight. 1, 2. At 2:30 in the morning, Eleanor heard it, a scream, male voices shouting, the sound of struggle. She clutched Juliet close, the child having woken at the noise, and prayed that Ashford was safe. When dawn finally broke, a knock came at her door. It was Graves, the butler, his usually impassive face showing satisfaction. His Grace requests your presence in the drawing-room, Miss Hartley. The matter is resolved. Eleanor found Ashford standing before the fireplace, looking exhausted but triumphant. Mrs. Ravenscroft and Charlotte sat on a settee, flanked by two sturdy men, Eleanor recognized as tenant farmers, who served Ashford with loyalty. The older woman's face was a mask of fury, while Charlotte wept genuine tears of fear. They came, Ashford said simply, entered my study with lockpicks, attempted to break into my safe where they believed the documents were kept. They were caught in the act by witnesses. Mrs. Ravenscroft has confessed to pressuring Charlotte to steal the Pemberton necklace and frame you, Eleanor. Charlotte has admitted to placing the necklace in your belongings and to searching Juliet's room. They hope to find and destroy evidence of Juliet's legitimacy so they could claim her inheritance. Eleanor looked at the two women who had destroyed her life so casually. She felt no triumph, only a weary sadness that human greed could be so destructive. What will happen to them? She asked quietly. They will be transported to London under guard and handed over to the authorities. The evidence against them is overwhelming. They will face prosecution for theft, conspiracy, and attempted fraud. Their reputations are forfeit, and they will likely face imprisonment. Ashford's grey eyes were hard as stone. "Justice, Eleanor. Finally, justice." Obeyes as the sun rose over Ashford Manor, painting the Derbyshire hills in shades of gold and rose, Eleanor Hartley stood in the drawing-room of the manor and felt the weight of accusation finally lift from her shoulders. The truth had prevailed. She was free. The scandal that erupted when Mrs. Helena Ravencroft and Miss Charlotte Pemberton were arrested for theft and conspiracy sent shockwaves through London society. The newspapers seized upon the story with relish. A respected widow and her beautiful daughter exposed as schemers who had framed an innocent governess and plotted to defraud an orphaned child of her inheritance. The Ton spoke of little else through the Christmas season and into the new year. For Eleanor, vindication came in waves. Lord and Lady Pemberton sent a formal letter of apology and offered compensation, which Eleanor accepted with quiet dignity. Other families who had closed their doors to her now wrote letters of regret and invitations to call. The Duchess of Marlborough, a formidable arbiter of society, declared publicly that Miss Hartley had been grievously wronged and that anyone with sense could see the girl's integrity from the start. But Eleanor found that public restoration of her reputation brought less satisfaction than she had imagined. The year of suffering, the months of desperation and humiliation, could not be erased by belated apologies. She was grateful for justice, but found herself surprisingly unmoved by society's fickle change of heart. What mattered more was the quiet life she had built at Ashford Manor. Juliet thrived under her continued instruction, growing more confident each day. The child had weathered the storm of discovery and arrest with remarkable resilience, secure in the knowledge that her guardian loved her and that her place in the world was safe. The documents proving her legitimacy had been properly filed with solicitors, her inheritance secured beyond challenge. As winter softened into early spring, Eleanor found herself at a crossroads. Her name was cleared. She could return to London, accept any of several excellent positions offered by families of rank and means. She could rebuild her career, perhaps even establish her own school for young ladies, as she had once dreamed. Yet she hesitated, and the reason for her hesitation had grey eyes and rarely smiled. Ashford had been distant since the night of the arrest, cordial but formal. He took his meals in his study, rode out alone on his estate business, and rarely summoned her for the evening consultations that had become their pattern. Eleanor told herself it was natural. The crisis that had bound them was resolved, and they were reverting to their proper positions as employer and employee. She was a governess, he was a duke, and whatever connection had formed between them during their alliance was circumstantial only. But her heart refused to accept this logic. She thought of him constantly, his unexpected gentleness with Juliet, his fierce determination to see justice done, the way his voice softened when he spoke her name. She remembered the touch of his hand tucking hair behind her ear, the intensity in his eyes when he had sworn to protect her. And she knew with devastating certainty that she loved him. It was hopeless, of course. Dukes did not marry governesses, regardless of vindication or virtue. The gulf between their stations was unbridgeable, yet knowing this did not stop her heart from breaking a little each time she saw him. Late one March evening, Eleanor was in the library selecting books for Juliet's next week of lessons when Ashford entered. He stopped upon seeing her, and something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or something more complex. "Eleanor, I did not expect to find anyone here at this hour. I apologize, Your Grace. I will leave you to your privacy." "No." The word was sharp, almost desperate. "Stay, please. I have been wanting to speak with you, but I have not known how to begin." Eleanor's pulse quickened. She set down the books and turned to face him fully, waiting. Ashford moved to the fireplace, gripping the mantelpiece as though it were an anchor. "You have received several offers of employment from London families. Excellent positions. Mrs. Blackwood showed me the letters." "Yes, they are generous offers. Will you accept one of them?" "I have not decided." "You should accept. His voice was flat, carefully controlled. "Your talents are wasted here instructing one child. You deserve a larger sphere, recognition, the ability to establish your own academy as I know you wish. Here you are merely a governess, but in London you could be so much more." Eleanor felt something crack inside her chest. He was dismissing her, albeit kindly, sending her away now that her usefulness was at an end. "I see. If that is your wish, Your Grace, I will of course comply." "My wish?" He turned to face her, and she was shocked by the raw emotion in his expression. "My wish is that you stay, that you never leave Ashford Manor, that I might see you every day, hear your voice, watch you with Juliet. My wish is that you remain here not as governess, but as—" He stopped abruptly, seeming to struggle with himself. "As what?" Eleanor whispered. "As my wife." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and miraculous. "You cannot mean that," Eleanor said, though her heart soared even as she protested. "You are a duke. I am a governess. Society would never—" "Damn society." Ashford closed the distance between them in 3 strides, his hands coming up to frame her face with surprising tenderness. "I care nothing for their opinion. Eleanor, do you not understand? These months of working alongside you, watching your courage and intelligence, your kindness to Juliet, your refusal to be broken by injustice, you have become essential to me. I tried to maintain distance, to preserve propriety, but I cannot any longer. I love you. I have loved you perhaps from the moment you stood in my London study and faced me with such dignity despite your fear. Certainly, I have loved you since you agreed to help me despite every reason to refuse. You are brilliant, brave, principled, and utterly irreplaceable. Will you marry me? Will you become Duchess of Ashford and mother to Juliet? Will you take the risk of binding yourself to a man who is too cold, too proud, too damaged by years of isolation, but who loves you with everything he has?" Eleanor's hands came up to cover his, where they cupped her face. "You are not cold," she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You are protective, not proud but principled, not damaged but careful with your heart because it has been tested. And yes, yes, Ashford, I will marry you. I love you beyond reason or sense. I would marry you if you were a clerk or a farmer. Your title means nothing compared to the man you are." He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the chaste brushes of lips described in novels. It was fierce and tender and searching, a question and an answer, a promise and a claim. Eleanor melted into him, her arms winding around his neck, his arms crushing her close as though he would never let her go. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Ashford rested his forehead against hers. "We will face opposition," he said quietly. "The scandal-mongers will have a field day. The old biddies will sniff and gossip. My peers will question my judgment. I know. But if you are certain—" "I have never been more certain of anything." He pulled back slightly, his grey eyes burning with intensity. "You are my equal, Eleanor, in every way that matters. Intelligence, strength of character, capacity for love. In these things, you surpass most of the noble women I know. I would be honored to have you as my Duchess, and I swear to you that I will spend my life ensuring you never regret accepting me." "I could never regret it," Eleanor said, smiling through her tears. "You saved me when I was lost. You gave me justice when the world condemned me. You trusted me when I had no reason to be trusted. How could I not love you?" They stood together in the firelight, holding each other, making quiet plans for a future they would build together. Ashford spoke of improvements he wanted to make to the estate, of his hope that Eleanor would help him establish a school for tenant farmers' children, of travels they might take. Eleanor shared her dreams of creating a library accessible to the village, of ensuring Juliet received the finest education possible, of making Ashford Manor a place of warmth and welcome rather than lonely grandeur. "When shall we marry?" Ashford asked. "I confess I would prefer immediately, but you deserve a proper courtship, a wedding with all the ceremony you wish." "I need no ceremony beyond the essentials," Eleanor said. "I care only that we are legally and properly married before God and witnesses. We could marry by special license within days, could we not?" We could. He smiled, and it transformed his face from handsome to beautiful. You continue to surprise me, Eleanor Hartley. Most women would demand a grand London wedding. I am not most women, as you have had occasion to notice. Besides, I have little interest in performing for society's benefit. I would rather marry you quietly and begin our life together without unnecessary spectacle. Then that is what we shall do. He kissed her again, more gently this time. I will procure the license tomorrow. We can marry at the village church by week's end if the vicar agrees. And then, my love, you will never face the world alone again. The wedding took place on a Thursday afternoon in the small stone church that had served the Ashford estate for 3 centuries. Juliet attended, her eyes shining with joy, serving as Eleanor's bridesmaid. The vicar conducted the ceremony with warmth, clearly approving of the match, despite its unconventional nature. A handful of servants and tenant families bore witness, their presence making the event feel like a community celebration rather than a furtive, shameful union. Eleanor wore a simple gown of ivory silk that Ashford had commissioned, its elegant lines and fine fabric making her feel beautiful without ostentation. Ashford wore his formal attire, but his eyes never left Eleanor's face throughout the ceremony, and when he spoke his vows, his voice carried the weight of absolute sincerity. I, Edward James Thorne, Duke of Ashford, take thee, Eleanor Margaret Hartley, to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part, according to God's holy ordinance. This is my solemn vow. Eleanor responded with steady voice, I, Eleanor Margaret Hartley, take thee, Edward James Thorne, Duke of Ashford, to be my wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part, according to God's holy ordinance. This is my solemn vow. When the vicar pronounced them man and wife, and Ashford kissed his new duchess, applause erupted from their small congregation. Juliet rushed forward to embrace them both, declaring herself the luckiest girl in all of England to have Miss Eleanor, now Duchess Eleanor, as her guardian. The wedding breakfast was held at the manor, a joyful affair that lasted well into the evening. Ashford proved surprisingly adept at revelry when his happiness was genuine, laughing at toasts and leading Eleanor in a waltz that left her breathless and giddy. As night fell and the celebrations wound down, Ashford and Eleanor stood together on the terrace overlooking the grounds, her hand in his, the weight of her new wedding band solid and real upon her finger. "Do you have regrets?" Ashford asked quietly. "It is not too late to change your mind." "Well, legally it is, but I would understand if—" Eleanor silenced him with a kiss. "No regrets. Not now, not ever. You have given me everything I thought I had lost. Purpose, family, love. How could I regret becoming your wife? I am the one who gained everything," he said, pulling her close. "You brought light into my life, Eleanor. You made this house a home. You gave me hope that I could be more than the cold, isolated creature I had become. I promise you I will spend every day proving myself worthy of your love." "You already have," she whispered against his chest. "You already have." Summer arrived at Ashford Manor in a riot of colour and life. The gardens that Eleanor had admired from her window during those first uncertain weeks now became her domain to shape and enjoy. She worked alongside the head gardener to establish new plantings, cutting gardens for the house, a kitchen garden with herbs and vegetables, and a small wilderness area where Juliet could explore and observe nature for her scientific education. The scandal of the Duke's marriage to his governess had indeed caused a stir in London, but Ashford's indifference to society's opinion proved contagious. When the Duchess of Marlborough called and pronounced Eleanor a woman of remarkable quality, precisely what Ashford needed, other influential voices followed suit. The fact that Eleanor's reputation had been publicly restored, that she had been the victim of a conspiracy rather than a true scandal, helped considerably. Within months, the marriage was accepted, if not universally celebrated, and invitations began arriving for the Duke and Duchess of Ashford to attend various social events. They accepted some and declined others, finding a comfortable balance between social obligation and private happiness. Eleanor discovered she enjoyed certain aspects of her new position, the ability to support charitable causes, to sponsor educational initiatives, to use her influence for good. She established the Catherine Thorne Memorial School in the village, named for Juliet's late mother, which provided education for children of all classes. Ashford supported this venture enthusiastically, both financially and personally, occasionally teaching mathematics to the older pupils. Juliet flourished in ways that delighted them both. The anxious, tentative child had transformed into a confident young girl who could debate philosophical questions with her guardian, play complex piano pieces without hesitation, and organize the younger village children into elaborate theatrical productions. She called Eleanor Mama now, having asked permission with touching formality one evening at dinner. The request had moved Eleanor to tears, and even Ashford's eyes had grown suspiciously bright. One afternoon in late July, Eleanor was working in the library, cataloguing recent acquisitions, when Sarah, the housemaid who had become a trusted friend, entered with unusual excitement. "Your Grace, forgive the interruption, but there are visitors. Lord and Lady Pemberton, and they've asked to speak with you." Eleanor's heart gave a small jolt. She had not seen the Pembertons since before the trial that had resulted in Mrs. Ravenscroft and Charlotte being sentenced to 5 years' imprisonment for their crimes. The emerald necklace had been recovered and returned, and the family had sent their formal apologies, but there had been no personal contact. "Show them to the drawing room, Sarah. I will be there directly." She found them standing by the windows, looking uncomfortable and older than she remembered. Lady Pemberton had silver threading through her dark hair now, and Lord Pemberton's face showed lines of strain. But when they turned at her entrance, their expressions held genuine contrition. "Your Grace," Lady Pemberton said, dipping into a curtsy that Eleanor found both strange and unnecessary. "Thank you for receiving us. We do not deserve your kindness after what happened. Please sit," Eleanor said gently, gesturing to the chairs. "You are welcome here. Can I offer you tea?" They declined, too agitated for social niceties. Lord Pemberton spoke first, his voice heavy with regret. "Miss Hartley, forgive me, Your Grace. We came to offer our apologies in person, not merely through letters. We failed you terribly. We believed Charlotte's lies, we condemned you without proper investigation, and we nearly destroyed your life through our negligence and prejudice. We should have known," Lady Pemberton added, tears gathering in her eyes. "You were with us for 2 years, Miss Hartley. You were part of our family. We should have trusted what we knew of your character rather than accepting the evidence at face value. Our younger daughter, Mary, has never forgiven us for dismissing you. She knew you were innocent and tried to tell us, but we would not listen." Eleanor felt the old anger and hurt stirring, but found them diminished by time and happiness. "You were faced with what appeared to be damning evidence," she said carefully. "I cannot say I do not harbor some resentment for how I was treated, but I understand that you believed you were protecting your family. Charlotte was very convincing. She was always manipulative," Lord Pemberton said bitterly. "We simply never imagined her capable of such calculated cruelty. Her mother, though, Helena, was always grasping and envious, but we thought family connection would prevent actual malice. We were wrong on all counts." "What has become of Mary?" Eleanor asked, genuinely curious about the young girl who had been her pupil. Lady Pemberton's expression softened. "She is thriving, actually. We found her a new governess, though no one could replace you. She is 14 now, accomplished and kind-hearted. She asked us to tell you, should we see you, that she never doubted your innocence and that she hopes you are happy." "I am," Eleanor said simply, "very happy." Please give Mary my regards and tell her I remember her fondly." They spoke for another half-hour, the Pembertons sharing news of London society and expressing genuine pleasure at Eleanor's marriage and elevation. When Ashford entered, having been informed of their presence, he greeted them with cool courtesy that gradually warmed as he observed Eleanor's willingness to forgive. After the Pembertons departed, promising to write and hoping to maintain friendly relations, Ashford pulled Eleanor into his arms in the privacy of the library. "You are remarkably generous," he said, kissing her temple. "I am not certain I could have been so gracious to those who wronged me so profoundly." "You are wiser than I am," Ashford murmured against her hair. "One of the many reasons I love you." That evening, they took dinner in the family dining room with Juliet, a nightly ritual they all treasured. The conversation ranged from the progress of Juliet's studies to plans for a trip to the Lake District in autumn, to Ashford's news that Parliament was considering education reforms he had helped draft. After dinner, they retired to the music room, where Juliet played the piano while Eleanor worked on embroidery, and Ashford read aloud from the evening's newspapers. It was domestic and peaceful, a scene of contentment that Eleanor had once thought forever beyond her reach. Later, after Juliet had been tucked into bed with a story and a kiss, Eleanor and Ashford walked through the gardens in the warm summer darkness. The air was sweet, with the scent of roses and jasmine, and stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. "Do you remember," Eleanor said, "when I first arrived here, how I stood at my window watching the grounds and thinking how beautiful but how lonely it seemed? I remember. I watched you from my study window, standing at yours, and thought how fitting it was that Ashford Manor had attracted yet another lonely soul." "But it's not lonely anymore," Eleanor said, squeezing his hand. "We've filled it with warmth and laughter and love. We've made it what it should always have been, a true home." Ashford stopped walking, turning to face her in the moonlight. His expression held the tenderness that still surprised her sometimes, the softness he showed only to her and Juliet. "You did that, Eleanor. You took a cold, empty house and a cold, empty man and brought both to life. I am not the person I was before you came. I am better, happier, more human. That is your gift." "Our gift," she corrected. "We healed each other, Edward. I gave you warmth, perhaps, but you gave me justice and safety and love. We made each other whole." He kissed her then, soft and slow, a kiss of love rather than passion, though passion was never far from the surface between them. When they parted, he kept her close, his arms wrapped around her waist, her head resting on his shoulder. "I received a letter today," he said quietly, "from an old friend who is working with the prison reform movement. He mentioned that Mrs. Ravenscroft and Charlotte have been model prisoners, expressing remorse for their actions. There is some talk of early release in a few years, if they continue to show rehabilitation." Eleanor considered this. "How do you feel about that?" "Ambivalent. Part of me wants them to suffer as they made you and Juliet suffer, but a larger part recognizes that prolonged imprisonment serves little purpose once genuine remorse is achieved. If they are truly reformed, perhaps they deserve a chance at redemption." "I agree," Eleanor said, "though I confess I have no desire to see them or welcome them back into our lives. Nor would I ask you to. But I thought you should know, should the topic arise in the future." They walked on through the gardens, discussing lighter matters, improvements to the estate, books they were reading, Juliet's progress. Eventually, they made their way back to the manor, up the grand staircase, and to the chambers they shared as husband and wife. As Eleanor prepared for bed, brushing out her hair before the mirror, she caught sight of her reflection and paused. The woman looking back at her was transformed from the desperate, frightened governess who had arrived at Ashford Manor less than a year ago. This woman's eyes held confidence and peace. Her posture spoke of security and love. Her expression showed contentment earned through trial and vindication. Ashford appeared behind her in the mirror, his hands coming to rest on her shoulders. "What are you thinking?" "That I am happy," Eleanor said simply. That after everything, the false accusation, the months of fear and poverty, the uncertainty, I have found myself here with you, in a life I could never have imagined. It feels like a story, too perfect to be real. It is real, he said, bending to kiss her neck. You are my Duchess, my love, my partner in all things. This is your home, your life, your rightful place. No one can take it from you now. I know. She turned in her chair, looking up at him with all the love she felt shining in her eyes. And I am grateful every day for the Duke who pretended to despise the new governess, while secretly searching for the one who framed her. Ashford smiled, that rare, full smile that still had the power to make her heart skip. I am grateful for the governess who was brave enough to trust him despite his terrible disguise, who saw past his coldness to the man beneath, who agreed to stand beside him, not behind him, as they built a life together. He pulled her to her feet and into his arms, and Eleanor went willingly, knowing she was home in every sense that mattered. The past was laid to rest, its hurts healed, and its injustices corrected. The future stretched before them, bright with promise and rich with love. She had been accused falsely, had lost everything, had stood at the edge of ruin. But she had also found strength she did not know she possessed, had fought for truth and justice, and had ultimately claimed a happiness more profound than she had ever dared imagine. As she lay in her husband's arms that night, Eleanor Hartley, now Eleanor Thorne, Duchess of Ashford, reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here. From the shadows of accusation to the light of vindication, from desperate governess to beloved wife, from isolation to belonging. She had bloomed where she was planted, even in the hardest soil, and the garden she had cultivated of love, justice, and second chances would flourish for all the years to come. If you have enjoyed this story, please remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share in the comments which part of the story resonated most with you. Your support allows me to continue bringing these tales of redemption and love to listeners around the world. Thank you for being part of this journey.